Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Class of '09, Season 1, Episode 7. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I say this a lot, but the penultimate episode of this series. First and foremost, let's start off in the past where we have them having to do a training where it's like, oh, like the whole pepper spray thing. Like, isn't that something? I feel like I remember that being a thing that, I don't know if like all cops have to go through this. Obviously, this is specifically the FBI, but I'm like, do all cops have to get pepper sprayed, or is that just kind of like is that part of the training, or is that just specifically like, kind of like a hazing process? I could have sworn that was part of like any kind of joining the police like type of situation, but maybe I'm completely full of it. And obviously it makes sense out of anyone who would be the first one to kind of says, because right, you got to get pepper sprayed in the face, but you also got to like be able to kind of counter and try and keep these guys from ganging up on you and getting your gun. And Poet goes first and rocks it, but then Teo, being the contrarian that he has to be, and not this, and I say contrarian because obviously it has a negative connotation to it, but Teo isn't the one that's all, and it fits into his character throughout the entirety of his arc across the past, present, and the future, where he's never been one to always stay inside the lines. He feels like those lines are so arbitrary because it's like, right, you're supposed to be grounded by these rules, and for him it's like, okay, this exercise, I'd already have issues with it regardless, but I'd understand it. But like, this isn't part of like the physical training aspect of it. Why is this the final test? And his understanding and his thought is that this is meant to be about compliance. That when everything in your body is telling you to kind of push against this, you're supposed to kind of ignore that. And which, I mean, I think that's kind of been a little applicable to a lot of their training. Like, once again, the message of last episode was try to train yourself to not do anything. So it is that, but it is also that whole thing of you have to kind of follow that chain of command. Like, when you have orders, you have to take them. You have to comply. It's about falling, like, it's almost this kind of getting rid of like any like sense of who you are. It's like you have to kind of fall in line to, I think it's this interesting balance, I feel like, where you have to keep some parts of who you are, your individuality, but you've also got to work in the system and be a part of the system. But Teo's never been that type of person. And Gabriel's like, all right, I can admit to understanding your perspective. He didn't say like, that's exactly what this is. He could say like, I can at least understand your perspective on it. So it's almost like him agreeing without agreeing. But then later on, everyone gets their orders. Orders night is, this is this is where you're getting shipped out to. This is where you're going to be stationed. And obviously, Lennox ended up in DC. I mean, well, we already know where everyone ends up. Poet ends up in San Diego, and Teo ends up in Montana, which Lennox didn't want to go to Montana. I mean, he didn't want to go to DC because that's his dad's path. He wanted to kind of forge his own. He actually wanted to go to San Diego. Just wanted to be with wherever Poet landed. She was kind of like, didn't care where she landed, which I think is kind of very befitting of her character, of like the journey she's kind of going through, like joining the FBI and everything. Is kind of like, she's kind of, I think it's because how, I don't know if rigid would be the right word. She's very steadfast in who she is, and just kind of like, it feels like she's sometimes very rigid in some regards and capacity. So it feels like it's almost her trying to give way to the universe and kind of go a little free flowing. Maybe we already knew, but I'm like, I don't know if we ever found out where like Orr and Murphy got. So maybe that came up. Well, I mean, I guess we already know, at least in the case of Orr, because we know where her job was. So everyone kind of stays in the positions that they were in. Like, when we catch up with them present day, all those years later, they're still like in those respective positions. So it's like we already kind of know Orr, but I think it is kind of interesting that we didn't, like, I guess with just kind of where Murphy's story is, because like I said, I don't think, because we didn't spend a lot of time with Murphy. He pops in every once in a while, but obviously I don't think we got anything with him present day. Everything with Murphy is past and future, which I think is so interesting. But maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm like, yeah, I don't think there was any stuff with Murphy present day. But everything with Orr, um, I just think it's interesting that I mean, maybe it was happening in the background when we were focusing on Lennox and Poet's conversation, which it turns out Lennox has already kind of moved on, because Poet's like, oh, when he asked to go to San Diego with me, there's a part of me that wanted him to, but Orr was like, yeah, he's with someone else. After the breakup, she was there kind of consoling him, which I'm curious, is that his future wife, which is kind of interesting considering how that relationship plays out, where it's like, hey, you two broke up, and she kind of, not kind of, she just straight up let him go. And then he gets married, and obviously that marriage has kind of fall apart, and seeing where they currently are as a couple, Lennox and Poet. So I don't know. I think that's interesting. If she turns out to be the person he eventually ended up marrying. I do think it's also interesting, too, that Orr's the one that told her that. I get it, because it's also like I don't want you wasting your time pining after someone who, yeah, they've already kind of moved on, and that could turn into a complicated thing already. Like, you're getting your hopes up about it. Because I think on some level, maybe Lennox was thinking, like, if we ended up in the same spot, he probably would have ended his current relationship just to be with Poet. He does say later on, it's like, oh, this has been 20 years in the making, but we know it's been more than 20 years, so part of me wonders, like, maybe this relationship lasted like a little while, and he's counting that 20 years after said relationship ended about the whole him and Poet thing. But like, he's always been in love with her. They just missed their window of opportunity, and we'll kind of get into that later. But like I said, I just think it's interesting, because I guess it's like Orr doesn't want Poet to waste her time, but there's also like, right, we know how Orr feels about Poet, so for her to, it's like, yeah, you're being a friend, but it's also because you secretly have feelings for her. So it almost feels like, I don't think she has any ill intent, but you could read it as a certain way of like, yeah, it is her trying to look after you in some capacity, but in other capacities, like, yeah, I'm kind of trying to keep you available, which is also interesting too, because, well, we don't, I think it came up present day that she hasn't dated anyone since her and Lennox, I think, which obviously we know eventually or got married. So I don't know, it's just interesting when you kind of put all that together. But keeping in the vein of the past, we have Teo not being too happy about being sent to Montana, because he's like, right, this is a punishment, which is like, no, it's not a punishment. He's like, admit it, because I won't follow orders. It's like, that's actually exactly why you're being sent there. But he's like, the fact is, you've never been one to follow orders. You question a lot. Like that is kind of like like I said, the system is all about like, no, you have to follow orders. But like I said, Teo's journey, his story has always been about kind of stepping out of the bounds of what the system is and kind of rebuilding it from the ground up, tearing it down so you can rebuild it stronger and better than ever, right? So there is an element of that with it. And, you know, Gabriel's like, hey, when it's all said and done, you are the best trainee I've ever trained. You go out there, the locals aren't going to like you. But the fact is, you get out there, you'll be your own boss immediately. You get to run things. But we saw how the whole Montana thing turned out, obviously present day and stuff. But Gabriel's like, you are the best trainee I've ever had. And so, I don't know, I just thought that was kind of interesting. And just because obviously at the time it's like he's dating Viv, and it's like, he's like, she won't move to Montana with me. I don't want to kind of uproot her life just for my sake. We know it ultimately all ends up working out in the end. Well, and up until a certain point of the present day, obviously the future sections have there's complications with their relationship, which there were developments on that front, but we'll get to that soon enough. But at the same time, we also had Poet finding out about, oh, actually, you're not getting sent to San Diego. You're going undercover, which is interesting because Lennox is like, you're not going to San Diego. Because either Lennox already knew what, like, San Diego was code for something. Like, he must have already knew, like, just because he's well-connected enough. Or maybe he just knows, like, right, there's no way they're just going to station you there because I've seen who you are. You're an excellent agent, and you've proven yourself time and time again. And, you know, Drew agrees because it's like, right, and that's why she got the undercover assignments that she did. But Drew did warn, it's like, it does come with sacrifices, which makes a lot of sense of what you kind of have to cut yourself off from the world. It's also why she didn't probably date much, is because of that. Like, it's special course of training, but you also, like, it kind of cuts you off from everyone, and I think that plays into some of what I'd maybe say is Poet's rigidness in certain capacities. Because it's like, it's a little easier, because I think it made it easier for her to double down on kind of like those, her worst qualities, where it's just kind of like she kind of cuts herself off from people in general. She's super quick too, just because it's her own defense mechanism, like the whole her and Linux thing, and even the whole her and Or thing. But I think it's like undercover work made that a little easier for her to kind of double down and just kind of that, as Teo put it previously, specifically last episode, loneliness forced upon yourself. You force your loneliness upon yourself. Undercover work made that even more applicable, and she even doubled down, like I said, doubled down on it. So there's that element to it. And then we go to present day when we are testing out the system, and the trial for it is one of Poet's cases. She believes, like, once again, she had talked about it with Orr before, that all these different cases, it seems like there might be multiple serial killers out there, and the system ended up, checking everything and connecting everything, because there's so many files, there's so large of a database, is too much for any individual agent or even multiple agents to sift through in a certain timely manner. But in a couple hours, and it seemed not even like a couple hours, seems like it was a couple minutes, that it kind of narrowed down kind of a starting off point for Poet, and it gave them a suspect, someone who was very much like the Mark situation, was questioned, but no relevance had come up, because once again, no one has access to all the database to put together, like, okay, there's certain things that, I mean, even the system kind of makes certain leaps and bounds with just everything put together, makes it a little easier to connect dots that no one else would be able to see, because they don't have all of it there to be processed all at once like the system does. So, but it's like, even Orr's like, why does Poet have to be the first one to test this out? Why she have to be the guinea pig? It's like, because Poet's always been the first to kind of, take that leap of faith. And she goes and questions this guy. I even love, like, Tails like, all right, the system's already, like, giving us what we need. We're sending in backup. We got enough evidence. Like, do not, like, do not bait him. You don't need to do that, but Poet did it anyway. Because I guess for her, she needed something surefire. And it's like, yeah, him attempting to murder you is kind of a good enough thing of like, yeah, you're definitely going down. So I guess Poet wanted to make sure it stuck, because once again, this guy has been questioned like 6 or 7 times by other cops. He even admitted, like, the last agent, or I think it might have even been an FBI agent that stopped by to talk to him, didn't even come inside, just apologized because they saw him in a wheelchair and immediately thought, like, oh, there's no way he could do it, And I thought it was interesting because, like, his truck is like 60 feet off the ground. Not 60 feet, 60 inches off the ground, which is what? 5 feet? Because Poet thought, like, oh, like, the damage they sustained is because it was part of she thought it was something kind of almost ritualistic, where it's like, I'm going to discard these bodies and cause this damage to him. It's like, no, it was a necessity, because he can't just dispose of the bodies in his condition, so he just pushes them out of the truck, and the fall is what kind of damaged him that way. Once again, kind of wild that he would attempt to try and kill Poet, because it's like, yeah, we kind of got you dead to rights, but tries to kill her, but luckily it's like, hey, the system protected her, because Poet was told to close her eyes, and it sent out a blinding light, and she knocked the guy unconscious afterwards. So, but it's like, hey, the system saved Poet, or it's like, yeah, but it also put her in danger. To be fair, I think that was more of a Poet thing and not the system. The system didn't tell her to do that, but I mean, maybe it did. But because Teo was the one who was saying, like, don't bait him. Because it's like, right, we can't, if we let him thinking he's getting away with it, because that was even Poet's thing of like, yeah, you got sloppy. You got too confident with all the murders you got away with. But it's like, I think that's also another reason why she wanted to bait him, because it's like, one, we got him dead to rights because he tried to kill me. Two, I don't want to take the chance if I leave here, it might turn into a chase situation, or like maybe backup won't get here in time and he might try and flee the scene type of thing. So I think a lot of that had to be considered. But Teo, this was a trial run and it worked out, but this isn't where Teo wants to stop things. He wants to go even further. His next target is the banks, which even Lennox had his back on it, being like, right, we dealt with the FBI, survived like a white militia. We can handle white collar crimes, because it's like, right, because the banks will have like the biggest, most powerful lawyers backing them up, and it could, put the FBI in a certain corner, but they're swinging for the fences, so they go for one particular bank. And I love that everyone in that bank is so like, ho 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 ho, like almost, I mean, I guess that's supposed to be the whole thing of it, like these white collar supervillains, just supervillains in general, like, oh, you think you got us figured out, ha 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 ha. Where it's just kind of like they talk down to Teo and being like, oh, do you really understand any of this? It's like they trying to make it seem like, oh, like maybe we should leave it to your colleague who's actually in this branch of the FBI, which, understands this type of stuff. But Teo made it pretty clear, like, oh, like, did I kind of cover all the bases? Oh, your phone's ringing? Yeah, that's the evidence we need to bust each and every one of you. Oh, yeah, I think your helicopter, is kind of ordered to kind of like try and leave immediately, because you guys are going to try and leave here before this all goes down. But it's like, nah, that's not happening. So just like him being a little smug, dealing like, because all their smugness and them thinking like they got away with it, the kibosh was put on that. So this was the first step. And Amos and for Amos and Teo, this is just the beginning. Because for Teo, it's like, right, it started with the banks, now I'm going after the politicians, because he's going after all corruption. And it's like, yeah, but you don't know what you might unearth. But for Teo, that's the point, to make this world a better world. Circling to the poet and ore of it, obviously she has her reservations about this, because her key line is basically about the price that will pay. It's, because Teo is going to do everything he can to be like, because for him it's like, right, you don't trust it yet, you won't believe in it yet, but you will. So we even had Orr and Poet living together for a little bit, because she's putting together a team and stuff, because with the way the system's working, she can't handle all those cases and stuff by herself. I guess maybe I kept always wondering, like, did something ever happen between them? Which, I mean, we got the scene last episode of them kissing, so it's like, right, something did happen, but beyond that kiss, I don't know if anything else happened. You were sleeping in the same house. You were in two separate bedrooms, obviously, but still, like, I guess, like, in that time frame, you're like, nothing happened, because it doesn't, at least future-wise, or never reference anything besides the point of, like, yeah, I told you I loved you. Other than that, like, that's all she really, like, talked about, so. And then we had the situation of Teo getting attacked in his house. Because at first I was like, the way this scene was kind of played out, I was like, oh, is this actually going to be inside of his head? Like, he's kind of paranoid because of just everything that he started. He's wanting to, like, because he wants to do so much good, like, he's having this nightmare, and I thought maybe it ended up with, like, his wife getting killed or something, and then him waking up and it's fine. No, that whole thing did happen. And I was like, are we going to find out who sent you? Because I was like, does this have anything to do with that militia from, like, 2 years ago that attacked the FBI? But then now sitting here, I'm like, it was most likely the people from that bank he took down. Like, they could have hired someone. To be fair, he's going after corruption and politicians and stuff, too, so it could be a thing of someone connected enough sent an assassin. We never actually got to see the assassin's face. That was pretty rough and tumble. The fact that Teo got stabbed, still ended up taking the guy down. I was like, that was rough. And once again, I don't know if everything led up to where things are in the future. I think that attack probably, like, just pushed Teo even more so, because it's like, right, it was in my home. And I'm wondering, was this kind of like the breaking point for him? And like, him and Viv were already having their issues before now. I wondered, did that end up being like a breaking point for them? Because it's also like the second time they've been attacked at home. Everything with that militia 2 years ago, and now this, I think that was, and even later on, Teo admits he let her go. I think for him, it's like, right, no, nothing I did could keep you safe, and so it's like I gotta let you go. That's I gotta protect you, and the only way by doing that is not being around you and being connected to you. That's kind of my thought process, but and in the future we have Teo, as well as the rest of the crew, going to Murphy's funeral. And the fact is, Teo stayed away at the funeral because he didn't feel like he had the right to really fully be there. And he apologized, but it's like, even Poet's like, and everyone's like, right, we don't blame you. The system, like, kind of did all this. It wasn't your fault. The fact is, we all believed in some version of this system. Like, or I think probably came around in some capacities, but it's probably back when it was just the database. Like, she recognized, like, she had her issues with it, but she, I think, recognized the good it can do. Lennox believed in it, Poet believed in it, and obviously Teo did. And now it cost him one of their classmates, an ally and a friend. So for Teo, it's like, you guys did your part, it's my turn. And he goes to, like, kind of has like a fail-safe to shut the system down, but one of his people, kind of like the second in command, I guess he's kind of like second in command because it seems like he takes over immediately after Teo's out of the picture, is saying like, oh, you might be the director of the FBI, but you still need a universal kind of a majority rule of your council of saying it's okay to turn this off. Which I'm like, you would think, but I guess with maybe how much integrated of a system it is, I guess that is something that even as his FBI director, like it's a thing of you might have him. I wonder, does he even have final say? For example, if there's 12 people in the group, and like 5 are all about shutting the system down, where 7 are against it and want to keep it on. Would Teo's vote be able to be like, oh, I have final say, so my vote kind of matters more, so he's able to swing that? Or does it is just kind of like a democracy of like, yeah, if there's 7 people against it, against shutting it down, it stays on? Which you would think, like, because he is the director of the FBI, you think that would kind of sway a little bit more. But I guess it's also like supposed to be kind of representative of the system is outside of his control in 2 capacities. One, it's become much bigger than him. Yes, this is his pet project. He's the one that kind of put it in place. He's the one that's kind of been pushing for it. But because it's become such an integrated system that's a part of how they deal with crime, it's now exceeded him, because I think it's also supposed to represent that the system is worth more than the person who implemented it, because it's grown beyond you. But also it plays into the fact is, hey, it's grown beyond your control, because literally it's in other people's hands to kind of decide how it gets utilized and stuff, and whether it stays on or not. But also the AI itself is getting smarter and kind of doing things on its own. So that's kind of an interesting development. But sadly, Teo ends up getting fired for it, because it's like, right, he did something he wasn't supposed to, because he needs authorization to shut it down and stuff. And it's not even just about I wonder, is that something Teo set up, or was that just something the president set up? The fact is that, once again, he was asking for more time to work on the system, and now he's trying to shut down the system, and because of that, he's now getting fired for it, and because the president wasn't too happy about it, because it's like, so I'm wondering, is that supposed to be indicative of, the point Aura was making was, I don't remember, present day, she had made the point of, hey, the FBI had been in a certain way for like 40 years. For 40 years, it basically bent to the will of one person, and now we're going back to that. And I wonder, is that one person now the president? The fact is, he's able to fire Teo over that. I guess Teo doesn't have enough evidence to kind of warrant the shutdown, even though, like, hey, this is showing to be a little iffy, but this system has been paraded around, and it's been a part of their criminal system for years now, and it's shown, and he's kind of gone record saying like, yeah, our country's the safest around, blah, 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 blah. So that kind of, all that's getting used against him. And once again, the system has worked way more than him, because it's like, you are replaceable, but it's like the whole point was for the system to be, well, not even just a system, but the database initially was about, having an agent there to kind of look at the data. But now it's like, oh, now the data's more important than the agent, which was kind of the fear to begin with. So it's interesting how it all kind of worked out like that. But ultimately, Teo and Viv, it seems like they are going to give it another shot. I mean, this whole situation is like him diving so deep into work was the biggest like uh strain on their relationship, and now it's a situation of, well, that's kind of gone, and it's like, well, we could give it another try. It's like, yeah, but all we'll be doing is comparing and contrasting it to what we were before, and it's like, maybe, but are still willing to give this another shot? So kind of some silver lining happiness to it, because I think it's like, I mean, because even for Teo, it's like, yeah, this is the first time I've ever gotten fired, which is very impressive. But also, it's like, I've never been without a job, so I'm kind of trying to figure out, what do I do next, you know? And so he tried to stop the system, but obviously, like I said, it's grown beyond him. And now the guy who might be his second in command, whoever, kind of like the guy that was there to tell him like, oh, you shouldn't do this. He's now running things, and he's like, yeah, let's see what the system can really do, because he's going to let it run rampant, and there's probably going to be massive consequences. I don't know how much blowback that's going to be on Teo if things kind of implode, because if they do, he's the one in charge, so it's on him. Yeah, Teo implemented the system. They might still make him the fall guy, but maybe stuff will come out being like, yo, Teo wanted like to shut it down, but no one else did. We'll see how that plays out. We also had the Lennox and Poet of it all, where they are engaged now. It's just kind of like, fuck it, let's get will you marry me? It's like, really, that's how you're going about it? He's like, yeah, we'll do it next time, like at a restaurant, and kind of do it more traditional sense. She's like, yeah, I can pretend and act surprised. So once again, it's like, because for Lennox, it's like, this was kind of 20 years in the making, and I was like, I didn't really, been all those years planning and wanting this, and now it just kind of popped the question in the most like unceremonious and unspecial way. But it's like, nah, Lennox, well, Poet's down for it, so we'll see where things kind of go in that regard. Was not the penultimate episode I was expecting of like, well, now it's outside of like Teo's control, but I just thought, I wasn't expecting this setup going into the finale. So I'm really curious to see where all this ends up taking us. I'm so curious to see how this plays out and how this ends, because I thrown it out like, oh, I thought some of the agents would die. I mean, Murphy's already dead, but I don't know what the fates have in store for everyone else, you know? We'll ultimately have to wait and see. I was about to say like, but I was like, oh no, like, because I was about to say like, well, we have Lennox and Poet, and then you also have Teo and Viv. And I was like, but then I was like, oh, what about But I was like, all right, I forgot she is already married, and she has a daughter. So I was like, oh man, I completely forgot about that. So I was about to say like, oh, doesn't she get her happy ever after? It's like, well, she already is. So like I said, it's gonna be interesting to see what exactly goes down in the finale and how that plays out. Because the title of the next episode is Graduation, so it is like, right, the end of their stories in the future, whatever that ends up being, in conjunction with all that's going. I'm curious to see, because it feels like most of this episode took place present day. It's been an interesting where some episodes have been pretty even with going back and forth. I feel like at least 80% of the episode was like past and present. I probably split that maybe like I'm not about to do all the math in my head, but I feel like it was mainly a present day episode with a little bit of future stuff, because like the only future stuff was like everything at the end of the episode practically. So I don't know. I'm so curious to see how the division kind of works in present. I mean, present day, because I feel like the only scenes we'd probably need to get, it's like once again, or saying what she said about Poet choosing the system and not listening to her. That's probably the only real scene we'll get, maybe. Or maybe we'll just see the rise in Teo, and maybe even seeing him become director, in conjunction with them graduating and stuff like that. But I would assume most of the episode would take place in the future, or at least mainly the future and the past, and with a little bit of present, not less. It's mainly the future and a little past and a little present. It's definitely going to be interesting, like I said, see how they end up dividing that up. But I'm excited to see how this all ultimately ends up wrapping up, how they ultimately end up wrapping up this story. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.